December 8th, 1941. Hashirajima Anchorage, Inland Sea, Japan. The night air tastes of salt and coal smoke. In the dark water, battleships sit like mountains, their hulls barely moving, their anchor chains groaning with each slow pull of the tide. Aboard the flagship Nagato, lamps burn behind shaded glass. The corridors smell of ink, wet wool, and cigarette ash. Boots thud softly over steel decking as officers move with controlled urgency. The kind that comes when the moment you have prepared for is no longer a plan, but a living thing. In the communications room, a radio man lifts his headphones, eyes wide, and calls for the duty officer. The message is short, clipped, encoded. It carries the weight of a world tipping. At the map table, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is not present. He is far away, at sea with his staff aboard the battleship, directing a war he always described as a race against time. But his shadow is in every line drawn on the chart, every pin, every timed dispatch. The men in this room know his famous warning, spoken more than once in private. He could run wild for 6 months, maybe a year, but after that he could promise nothing. That truth sits like cold iron in their stomachs. The duty officer reads, then reads again, and passes it up the chain. A runner moves at a half-jog, carrying the paper as if it might burn his fingers. In a nearby cabin, senior staff gather, uniforms pressed, collars stiff, faces tight but controlled. The first reports are incomplete. There is always fog in the opening hours, but the meaning is clear enough. The carrier striking force has hit its target. American ships have been caught. Flames, explosions, heavy smoke. The words feel unreal, like something written for a textbook that has not been published yet. A captain exhales slowly and allows himself a small nod, more reflex than celebration. Another officer murmurs that this is the blow that will break the enemy's spine. The phrase is familiar. It has been spoken in conference rooms, over tea, over cigarette smoke, over careful calculations and confident forecasts, somewhere deeper in the ship. An engine room telegraph clangs, and the sound travels through steel. It feels like a heartbeat. In Tokyo, in the Navy Ministry and the Naval General Staff, men in warmer rooms will soon read the same updates. Chief of the Naval General Staff Admiral Osami Nagano has spent years weighing ship counts, fuel reserves, industrial capacity, and political will. The Navy Minister, Admiral Shigetaro Shimada, has listened to arguments about resources and survival, about the need to strike south, about the United States as an obstacle that cannot be stepped around. The plans were never based on a secret American traitor walking through a door with a folder labeled War Plans. They were built on something both more mundane and more dangerous: assumptions. In the days leading to this night, Japanese naval leaders studied America the way gamblers study faces across a table. They had read American newspapers and listened to the echoes of speeches. They knew of isolationist voices and bitter debates. They saw a society divided by distance and politics and believed, or wanted to believe, that a sharp enough shock would bring negotiation, that the United States, stunned and humiliated, would choose a settlement rather than a long, expensive, angry war across the Pacific. That belief flowed through meetings like warm suck. It dulled edges. It made risks feel manageable. On Nagato, an intelligence officer stands near the chart and speaks cautiously, careful to sound professional even as adrenaline shakes his hands. American morale, he says, is hard to measure. American industry is vast, but their public, their Congress, their appetite for casualties, that is the weak point. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and they will sue for peace. A senior staff officer replies with a thin smile. It is not a shout, not a cheer. It is the quiet satisfaction of hearing a comforting idea spoken aloud. But in the same breath, Another man remembers Yamamoto's doubts. The warning again. 6 months. 1 year. Then the balance shifts, and the war becomes a machine Japan cannot stop. The room falls into a brief silence. It is filled by the scratch of a pencil and the distant hum of a ventilation fan. Outside, the anchorage is still dark, still calm, as if the sea itself has not yet heard the news. A young lieutenant, eager and nervous, mentions rumors that swirl through barracks and offices. That some American somewhere understands Japan. That someone might switch sides. That inside information might surface once the shock hits. He says it like a hopeful superstition. A commander fixes him with a look that cuts through the fantasy. There will be no miracle defector, not of the kind the lieutenant imagines. The Americans are not going to hand over their intentions like a gift. If Japan is to win, it will win through its own skill, speed, and nerve. And if Japan is wrong about the enemy's will, then no amount of clever planning will save them. The lieutenant swallows and nods, chastened. The older men return to the map, to the pins and lines, to the arithmetic of distances and fuel. They speak of follow-on operations, of pressing south, of seizing bases that can hold the perimeter. They speak of keeping the enemy off balance long enough for diplomacy to do what torpedoes cannot. Yet beneath every sentence is the same gamble. Not about American ships, but about American resolve. The first wave has landed, the first blood has been spilled, and already, in the quiet compartments of steel warships, the Japanese Navy is leaning on a belief that the enemy will behave the way Japan expects. The messages keep coming. Each one feels like a drumbeat. By dawn, the paper messages have become a steady river, and the river runs straight to Tokyo. December 9th, 1941. Tokyo, Navy Ministry. A winter sun hangs pale over the city. Inside the ministry, coal braziers cannot fully warm the long hallways. The air smells of damp uniforms and strong tea. Clerks move fast, stamping, copying, carrying folders from office to office. Every door seems to open on another room full of men in dark blue. Heads bent over maps that show the Pacific like a vast, empty stage waiting to be filled with ships and smoke. Admiral Shigetaro Shimada sits stiff-backed behind his desk, hands folded as if he is trying to hold the whole structure of the empire steady with his fingers. Across from him, staff officers present the first consolidated picture of Pearl Harbor. Tonnage sunk, aircraft destroyed, American dead. Words that should sound like triumph arrive with a strange aftertaste, because the list of what survived is almost as important as what burned. No American carrier confirmed sunk. Someone says it anyway, as if speaking it aloud can make it less true. The American carriers were absent. They are out there somewhere, steel shadows in the Pacific, and every man in the room knows what that means for the months to come. Still, the mood is confident. Not joyous, but confident in the way a locked plan feels when it finally clicks into place. Shimada listens to the summary, then asks the question that sits behind every plan the Navy has argued for: how soon will Washington talk? An aide answers carefully, there is no sign of an American approach. The American president has spoken. Congress has moved. The tone of American radio is furious, unified. Not the fractured, hesitant America the planners had studied through pre-war debates, but something sharpened into a single blade. Shimada says nothing for a moment. The room is silent except for the scrape of a chair leg and the faint hiss of steam pipes. In another building, Admiral Osami Nagano reads the same reports. He has the look of a man who has done the arithmetic and still hopes the numbers will bend to willpower. He speaks to his closest aides about tempo. The perimeter must be taken quickly. The Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. Every captured airfield and harbor is another lock on the gate. If the gate holds long enough, perhaps the Americans will decide it costs too much to break it down. No one in these rooms is waiting for an American defector to walk in with a briefcase full of war plans. That is not how this war is being understood here. Japanese admirals are wagering on something less dramatic and more fatal. They are wagering that America will choose negotiation when faced with distance, losses, and humiliation. The war becomes motion. December 10th, 1941, off Malaya, near Kuantan. Tropical air rolls over the sea, heavy and wet. Japanese twin-engine bombers skim low, their crews sweating under glass canopies. Torpedoes drop, white trails streaking toward two British capital ships, Prince of Wales and Repulse. When the torpedoes hit, the sea erupts. Smoke thickens. Men in the water wave and vanish. In Tokyo, the news lands like a gift. Proof that air power can shatter old naval power. Proof that the Western fleets are vulnerable. Officers speak of dominoes. If Britain can be struck down, if the Philippines can be crushed, if Singapore can be taken, then America will see the Pacific is too far, too expensive, too hopeless. You can feel the logic forming, neat and persuasive. It is the logic of the quick knockout. But across the ocean, the American reaction hardens instead of softening. In Washington, the language is not bargaining language, it is war language. In shipyards and factories, men and women begin to work longer hours. In barracks, recruits line up for haircuts and rifles. At sea, American submarines begin to hunt. It does not look like a nation preparing to quit. It looks like a nation that has decided it has been insulted in a way it cannot tolerate. Back in Tokyo, the Navy staff do not have perfect eyes on these changes. They read cables and translated headlines. They measure steel output and ship counts. But the emotional temperature of a society is harder to quantify. They remember the America of committees and isolationist rallies. They expect that America will eventually return to that posture once the shock fades. Admiral Yamamoto, far from the warm rooms of the ministry, pushes his forces forward with the impatience of a man who does not share the comfort. He knows the window is short. Every operation must add pressure and buy time. He wants a decisive battle. Not later, now, before American industry can turn the ocean into a conveyor belt of ships. The weeks blur into victories. Guam falls. Wake Island after a brutal fight. Hong Kong. The Philippines tightening like a noose around Corregidor. In the south, Japanese columns move through jungle and swamp. Warships cover landings. The rising sun flag goes up in places that had been guarded by Western powers for decades. In staff meetings, Japanese admirals speak about morale with the tone of men discussing weather. America will tire. They say, America will calculate. They say, a negotiated peace is the rational outcome. But the rational outcome depends on one critical assumption, that America will think like them. January 1942, Tokyo. In a conference room, a senior officer sets a file on the table. It is intelligence, not a confession from a traitor. It is fragmentary reports, intercepted radio traffic, assessments of American industrial mobilization. The numbers are sobering. A vice admiral runs a finger down the page and frowns. Another officer tries to soften it with a familiar line. America is rich, but rich nations dislike pain. Democracies argue. Democracies compromise. Democracies negotiate. Then a younger staffer, bold enough to risk the room, says the words that hang there like an icicle. What if they do not? No one answers immediately. You can hear the ticking of a wall clock. Somewhere outside, a train whistle sounds, distant and thin. The war has started exactly as Japan hoped on the surface, but underneath, the foundation is already shifting. The enemy is not reaching for the table to talk. The enemy is reaching for the tools to build. And in quiet moments, when the confident phrases fade, some of the admirals begin to sense the truth that will later become an admission. They did not lose because an American defector revealed plans. They may lose because they misread a nation. April 18th, 1942. Tokyo. The morning is clear enough that you can see Mount Fuji faint on the horizon, a calm postcard sky. Then the sirens begin. At first, many people do not believe it. Tokyo has been told the home islands are too far, too protected, too sacred for enemy bombers. But the sound grows, echoing between buildings, bouncing off rooftops, and then you hear it. Engines. Not the familiar tone of Japanese aircraft, but something rougher, heavier, alien. American B-25s appear low. Small shapes cutting across the city. They are not here to win a battle. They are here to make a statement. Bombs fall, and the city shudders. Smoke rises in dirty columns. Windows blow out. People run, shouting, clutching children, stumbling into alleys and shelters. For a few minutes, the capital of the empire is not untouchable. It is exposed. In the Navy Ministry, the first reports arrive fast and confused. Aide after aide pushes through doors with papers in shaking hands. Officers gather around telephones, voices tight, trying to confirm the unthinkable. An American raid on Tokyo. Admiral Shigetaro Shimada feels his stomach knot as the information takes shape. The raid is small, yes, but it carries a deeper wound. It means American carriers have come close enough to launch aircraft against the heart of Japan and slip away. It means the sea is not a wall, it is a road. In another room, Admiral Osami Nagano listens to an intelligence officer explain the likely method. Aircraft carriers, fast, audacious, operating on the edge of possibility. A pin on the map marks estimated launch points. And suddenly the Pacific feels smaller. Someone mutters that it is a stunt, a morale raid, a gesture. But the gesture hits where calculations do not. It hits pride. It hits confidence. It hits the story Japan has told itself about control. And inside that impact, a quiet panic grows. Because if America can do this in April, what can it do in 6 months? What can it do in a year? That same day, far from Tokyo, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto reads the reports at sea. His face does not change much, but his staff notices his eyes, the way they fix on the paper as if he's reading a verdict. This is what he feared. The enemy is not folding inward, the enemy is reaching outward. If Japanese planners had been hoping for negotiation, the raid is a blunt message from Washington that America is thinking in terms of attack, not compromise. In the weeks that follow, the Navy turns the raid into fuel for a new argument. The defensive perimeter is not enough. The American carriers must be destroyed, not damaged, not delayed, destroyed. Meetings become sharper. Voices rise. Maps are spread wide and covered in pencil marks. Midway becomes the center of gravity, an outpost that can be bait. Yamamoto presses his plan for a decisive battle, a trap that will force American carriers to fight and die. There are admirals who agree and admirals who worry about risk and complexity. The operation is bold, layered with moving pieces, timed like a watch. It depends on surprise. It depends on the Americans responding the way Japan expects. And even here, the old assumption flickers, not as openly, not as confidently, but it is still present. If the Americans lose their carriers, they will see reason. They will see the futility of crossing the ocean to fight an empire that still holds the Western Pacific. They will accept a settlement. In early May, at sea, the war offers a preview of what those assumptions will cost. May 7th, 1942, Coral Sea. The air is bright, the sea deceptively calm. Carrier aircraft scream overhead, climbing, diving, hunting ships they cannot see. Torpedo bombers skim low, their crews staring at the horizon until it snaps into a line of smoke and steel. Dive bombers roll over, engines howling. and fall like stones. When the Japanese light carrier Shoho is hit, the explosions rip through her deck and fuel lines, and the ship becomes a burning island. The radio call goes out. Short and final. Scratch 1 flat top. A day later, Shokaku is mauled, her flight deck torn and smoking. Zuikaku escapes damage but loses so many aircraft and crews that she is suddenly hollow. The Japanese tactical result is arguable, but the strategic meaning is unmistakable. The Americans are learning. They are fighting. They are not waiting to negotiate. Back in Tokyo, officers read the Coral Sea summaries with a new tension in their jaws. It is the first time the Japanese advance has been checked, not by land fortresses, but by carrier power meeting carrier power. It is not decisive, but it is proof of direction. In private, some Japanese naval leaders begin to shift their language. They stop saying when America will seek peace and start saying if, and in that tiny change, you can feel the ground moving. The war is no longer just about seizing resources and building a perimeter. It is about whether Japan can force the United States to accept reality before American reality becomes overwhelming. Yamamoto doubles down. Midway must happen. The Americans must be compelled. The American fleet must be cut down in a single sharp event, the kind of event that would make any rational government sit at a table. Yet even as he plans the trap, even as staff officers debate fuel, timing, and the placement of battleships and cruisers, the deeper misreading remains. They are still trying to shape an American decision by assuming America calculates pain the way they do. The American raid on Tokyo did not look like a nation preparing to bargain. It looked like a nation preparing to endure. June 4th, 1942, North Pacific, 200 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Dawn arrives cold and gray, the kind of light that makes metal look sharper. On the flight deck of the carrier Akagi, sailors move with practiced speed, boots slipping slightly on dew-damp planks. The air reeks of Ovia fuel and salt. Engines cough, then roar, and the whole ship seems to vibrate with restrained violence. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the bridge, binoculars raised, watching the first strike lift off toward Midway. He is calm in posture, but his mind is a crowded room. Orders, timings, fuel, the position of the American carriers that must be out there somewhere. He has been told the enemy will come. He has been told the enemy will be lured in. He has also been told, in more private language, that this battle can decide the war. On the hangar decks below, bomb carts rattle. Ordnance crews sweat as they move high, explosive bombs and torpedoes. Careful hands on the tools that can kill them if handled wrong. The plan shifts minute by minute. Reports come in from the Midway strike. The island is not neutralized. More attacks may be needed. Nagumo orders aircraft rearmed. Torpedoes are rolled aside. Bombs are brought up. Then another report arrives. American ships spotted. Maybe carriers. The rearming order changes again. Now torpedoes come back. Bombs go away. Planes are shoved, wings folded, then unfolded. Fuel hoses snake across decks. Pilots wait in cramped readiness rooms, faces set, fingers tapping unconsciously. Every change adds minutes. Every minute is a door that can open to disaster. And then, in the open sky, the first American attacks arrive. They come in low, desperate, almost suicidal. Torpedo planes from Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown skim the waves, slow, vulnerable, exposed. Japanese fighters cut into them, cannon fire stitching the air, tracers arcing like angry insects. One American aircraft after another splashes into the sea, torn apart before it can drop its weapon. On the bridge, some Japanese officers exhale, thinking the worst has been faced. The torpedo attacks have been blunted. The fleet is intact. The enemy has paid in blood. This is how the battle should go. But you can feel it. even if you cannot yet name it. Something is wrong. The American attacks are chaotic, yes, but they are also pulling Japanese fighters down, away from high altitude. The sky above the carriers opens like an unguarded roof. At 10:20 in the morning, the roof collapses. From high above, American dive bombers appear, falling steeply out of the sun. Their engines scream, their wings shudder. Pilots grip control sticks with white knuckles and stare at the carriers growing larger, impossibly fast. On Akagi, sailors look up and freeze for a heartbeat, the human brain refusing what it sees. Then the first bomb hits. A violent crack, a flash, a column of black smoke. Flaming fuel spills and runs, licking into planes armed and fueled on the hangar deck. The fire spreads like something alive. Men shout. Fire teams surge forward with hoses. The hoses are swallowed by heat. Another bomb detonates nearby. Steel warps. The deck becomes a furnace. Across the formation, Kaga and Soryu are struck in quick succession, their flight decks punched open, their hangars igniting into infernos. On the carrier Hiryu, Admiral Taman Yamaguchi watches the smoke pillars rise and understands instantly that the battle has changed shape. He orders counterstrikes with the aircraft that remain, and for a brief moment, the Japanese Navy still fights with its old sharpness. Hiryu's planes find Yorktown. Bombs slam into her deck. Torpedoes strike her side. The American carrier lists, smoke boiling upward. A Japanese cheer moves through Hiryu's compartments. Not loud, but fierce. Proof that the enemy can still be hurt. But the ocean does not stop moving. The Americans find Hiryu in the afternoon. Dive bombers attack again, and Hiryu takes hits that light her up from within. Fires roar. Planes burn. Men run through smoke thick enough to choke. Admiral Yamaguchi refuses to abandon ship. He stays as the carrier dies, choosing the old finality of honor over survival. By nightfall, the sea around Midway is littered with wreckage and oil slicks that catch the moonlight. The Japanese carrier force is ruined. The deck crews who began the day with routine precision now fight to breathe in smoke-filled corridors. Or they are gone. Word travels fast, but not fast enough to soften the shock when it reaches Tokyo. In the Navy Ministry, officers sit in stunned silence as the casualty lists and loss reports pile up. 4 carriers, thousands of trained pilots and deck crews, an entire tool set for naval war, burned away in a single day. Admiral Shimada listens to an aide read the message again, as if repetition might transform it into something less final. Admiral Nagano stares at the map, his finger tracing the ocean route that now looks like a trap corridor leading back toward Japan. Someone, voice low, says it feels as if the Americans were waiting. No one says defector, no one says betrayal. The feeling is more unsettling than that. It feels like the enemy understood Japanese intention without being told. Like a fighter who steps aside before the punch lands. The old hope of negotiation does not vanish in an instant, but it cracks, and you can hear the sound. Because now the idea that America will bargain requires a new belief. That America will give up after winning. And as the days pass, the admirals start to see the American pattern. They do not pause. They do not offer terms. They reinforce, repair, and return to the sea. Midway is not just a defeat. It is a message written in fire. America is not looking for a way out. America is looking for a way through. August 7th, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The jungle breathes like a living animal. Heat presses down so hard it feels physical. Sweat soaking shirts within minutes. Insects whine. Mud sucks at boots. The air smells of rotting vegetation and salt wind drifting in from Iron Bottom Sound. American Marines move off landing craft and into the green wall, rifles up, faces tense, eyes scanning for movement that might be only shadow. They do not come like a nation seeking a negotiated peace. They come like a nation crossing an ocean to take ground with their hands. In Tokyo, the first reports are met with disbelief and anger. Guadalcanal is far from the home islands, far from the place Japanese planners believed the Americans would dare to fight so soon after Midway, but there it is, a landing, an airfield half built by Japanese labor and engineers. Suddenly, in American hands, the Japanese Navy reacts with the instinct it knows best. Fight at sea, smash the landing force, starve the airfield, night attacks, fast destroyer runs, cruiser battles in the blackness. The Tokyo Express begins its dangerous rhythm, warships racing down the slot under cover of darkness, unloading troops and supplies, then sprinting back before daylight brings American aircraft. You can feel the shift in Japanese Admiralty thinking in the tone of their orders. In the opening months, they spoke of shaping peace. Now they speak of survival and delay. The perimeter is no longer expanding. It is being gnawed. September 1942. Iron Bottom Sound. Night is thick, warm, and absolute. The sea is a black sheet broken by wake foam glowing faintly with phosphorescence. Japanese cruisers and destroyers slide through the darkness, their lookouts straining, ears listening for the first hint of gunfire. When the shooting starts, it is sudden and savage. Searchlights stab out. Star shells bloom overhead, casting ghostly white light on ships that appear and vanish like apparitions. Heavy guns roar. Shells slam into steel. Men scream. Fire climbs masts. A ship takes a hit and shudders like a living thing. Japanese crews are skilled at night fighting. For moments, they feel the old confidence return. Their torpedoes are deadly. Their gunnery is practiced. They can still hurt the enemy, still carve victories out of darkness. But every victory costs something the Navy cannot easily replace. Pilots, trained deck crews, veteran petty officers, engineering specialists, men whose experience is measured not in months but in years. And across the ocean, America replaces its losses with a pace that begins to feel unreal. Back in Tokyo, officers study factory output and ship launch schedules with growing dread. The numbers do not argue. They crush, somewhere in those meetings. An older admiral says quietly that the Americans fight like a machine that has finally been switched on. Another replies that machines can be broken, but his voice does not carry certainty anymore. In late 1942, news arrives from the Central Pacific and the Aleutians, from the Indian Ocean, from convoy routes. American submarines are biting. American carriers are returning. New ships appear with names that were not on the pre-war lists. The war is becoming an equation with an answer Japan cannot change. And still, the idea of negotiation lingers in corners. Not as a confident plan, but as a hope people do not want to bury. If Japan can hold long enough, perhaps American voters will tire. Perhaps politicians will compromise. Perhaps the enemy will decide the cost is too much. But Guadalcanal becomes the grinder that eats that hope alive. November 1942. Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. The sea boils with tracers and splashes. Battleships and cruisers trade heavy blows at close range. The night is filled with the smell of cordite and burning paint. Men on deck feel concussion in their ribs with each salvo. A Japanese battleship fires, its guns flashing like lightning. American ships answer, and the ocean becomes a corridor of impact points. When daylight comes, aircraft finish what the guns began. Ships that survive the night are caught in the open, bombed, torpedoed, turned into smoke and sinking steel. The shoreline airfield stays in American hands. The Marines stay. The Americans keep building. The Americans keep flying. In Tokyo, the admirals start speaking of evacuation, a word that would have been unthinkable months earlier. The empire is not supposed to retreat. Retreat is poison. Retreat admits reality. But the reports from Guadalcanal are relentless. Starvation, malaria, units landing without enough food, destroyers burning fuel just to deliver rice and ammunition, then returning with wounded. It is not glorious. It is exhausting. January 1943. Tokyo, a meeting room. A map of the Solomons on the wall. Red and blue pins. A senior officer points at the American airfields, the growing network, the way they can now reach out and hit Japanese shipping and bases. He speaks with a steady voice, but the steadiness is an effort. The decision is made. Guadalcanal will be abandoned. When the evacuation succeeds, it is done with skill and courage. Destroyers racing in at night, pulling men off beaches under enemy eyes. But the skill cannot hide the truth. Japan has been forced backward. For the first time since the war began, the Japanese Navy must face the possibility that there will be no decisive battle that restores the situation. There will be only more battles, each one bleeding them, each one feeding an American war machine that grows stronger. In private conversations, Japanese admirals begin to admit what they would later say, openly, after defeat. They misread America. They believed the United States would seek a negotiated peace after a shocking blow and rapid losses. They believed political fracture would outweigh anger. They believed distance would defeat will. They believed their perimeter could become a bargaining chip. But the Americans did not bargain. They built, they trained, they sailed. They came ashore in places like Guadalcanal and refused to leave. And with every month that passes, the Japanese Navy discovers that its greatest enemy is not a secret set of American plans revealed by a defector. It is the simple reality that America has decided it will not stop until Japan is beaten. June 19th, 1944. Philippine Sea. The sky is a hard blue vault above the carriers, bright enough to make the ocean look like polished steel. On Japanese flight decks, aircraft are lined up tight, wings folded, mechanics and armorers moving with quick hands that cannot hide the fatigue in their faces. Many of the men here are not the veterans of 1941. They are younger, less trained, rushed through pipelines that cannot replace the experience burned at Midway and bled away over Guadalcanal. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa stands in his flagship, listening to reports, measuring the distance to the American fleet, and feeling the weight of expectation. Japan needs a great victory, the kind that resets the board, the kind that makes America pause, if there is still any room left for the old dream of negotiation. It is in a win so dramatic it shocks Washington into calculation. But the Americans have changed too. Their decks are crowded with aircraft. Their radar screens are alive with contacts. Their pilots have hours in the air, training that runs like a pipeline from factories to flight schools to carrier decks. Their ships are not isolated tools. They are parts of a system. When Japanese aircraft lift off, they climb into a sky that belongs to American fighters. The intercept happens far out. Hellcats drop in formation, guns flashing. Japanese planes disintegrate in bursts of flame and fragments, spiraling down into the sea. Radio chatter in Japanese cockpits turns frantic, then stops. The air becomes a graveyard. Some American pilots will later call it a turkey shoot, but in the moment it is simply slaughter. On Japanese carriers, deck crews wait for returning aircraft that do not come. They stare at empty horizon. They watch fuel gauges and time pass. They hear the distant thunder of anti-aircraft fire and do not know if it is victory or catastrophe. By the end of the day, Japanese naval aviation is shattered against, and once again, the war does not pause. America does not reach for negotiation. America presses closer. October 1944. Leyte Gulf. The sea is crowded with ships, a scale of steel and smoke that dwarfs earlier battles. Japanese admirals gather what remains of their surface fleet into complex plans, trying to strike American invasion forces, trying to buy time, trying to create an event so costly it forces America to reconsider. Admiral Takeo Kurita drives his heavy ships through narrow seas under constant threat. Bombs fall. Torpedoes hit. The super battleship Musashi takes blow after blow, absorbing punishment that feels endless. She lists, slows, and finally sinks, her massive hull sliding under as men jump into oil-slicked water. Kurita pushes on, and for a moment, in the confusion off Samar, Japanese heavy guns find American escort carriers and destroyers. It looks like the kind of sudden violence that could change a campaign. American sailors fire back with everything they have. Destroyers charging like smaller animals at a larger predator, laying smoke, launching torpedoes, dying with their guns still firing. Then American air power and confusion and sheer stubbornness turn the moment. Kurita withdraws, not because he wants to, but because the battlefield is a trap of aircraft and unknown forces. The decisive victory does not appear. The invasion continues. The American foothold becomes permanent. In Tokyo, the language changes again. The Navy no longer talks about holding a perimeter to force negotiation. It talks about delaying the inevitable, about inflicting casualties, about making the enemy pay. The calculations are no longer aimed at winning. They are aimed at shaping surrender terms. And that is where the old misreading finally reveals itself. Negotiation was always the imagined end point. But now it is Japan that must negotiate, and America still does not show interest in stopping. March 10th, 1945. Tokyo. Night turns into a nightmare of fire. American bombers come in waves, dropping incendiaries that turn neighborhoods into furnaces. The city becomes a storm of flame and wind. People run into canals, into streets, into burning dead ends. The air is thick with smoke so heavy it feels like swallowing cloth. The horizon glows orange. Japanese naval officers who once studied tonnage tables now look at casualty reports from their own capital. The war has come home in a form no battle fleet can stop. July 1945. Kura and the Inland Sea. Warships that once symbolized empire sit damaged and immobile. Bomb craters on decks. Twisted steel. Dead guns pointed uselessly at the sky. The sea that once felt like sanctuary now feels like a cage. There is nowhere left to maneuver. Nowhere left to hide. In this atmosphere, the question that began the war returns like a ghost. Why did we think they would negotiate? Not because an American defector promised peace. Not because secret plans were handed over. Because Japanese leaders believed they understood the United States. They believed political division would override anger. They believed democracies could not sustain long wars with high casualties. They believed a shocking blow would make America rational and cautious. But the war proved the opposite. August 1945. The news arrives in fragments and then as a crushing whole. A new kind of weapon. Cities destroyed in a single flash. The Soviet Union entering the war. The perimeter gone. The fleet ruined. The airfields lost. The shipping lanes cut. The empire collapsing inward. In the final meetings, some admirals speak with the dull honesty of men who have run out of places to hide. They say the Navy did what it could. They say the enemy had resources beyond measure. They say the decisive battle never came in the way they needed it to come. And in later years, when the uniforms are gone and the war is a memory that still burns, Japanese naval leaders will describe the core mistake in plain language. They misjudged American resolve. They thought America would accept negotiation after early defeats. They thought war weariness would bloom quickly. They thought the United States would weigh the Pacific in dollars and miles and decide it was not worth it. Instead, America weighed the war in pride, in outrage, in a sense of national injury, and decided it would not stop until Japan was forced to stop. So if you imagine a moment where Japanese admirals lean over a table, reading American war plans delivered by a defector, the truth is colder and less theatrical. No one arrived with secret folders. The admirals read their own expectations like they were intelligence, and they trusted them, and that trust more than any missing document, more than any unseen spy, helped carry Japan into a war it could not win.